The first time my sister-in-law called my son a fraud, my husband had been unconscious for less than 2 days. We were in the hospital family room when Marissa placed a white court envelope on the table and said she had requested an emergency D and a test. Daniel's trust, she explained, belonged to real blood if he died, and she was not going to let my 11-year-old steal it. Then she opened the family group chat on her phone. She had already written, "Claire has been lying for years. Owen is not Daniel's son." I stared at the message long enough to see 3 relatives had already responded. One had asked what proof she had. Another had written that this was not the time. Daniel's uncle had sent a single thumbs up. Marissa was watching me instead of the phone. She looked exhausted, but not uncertain. Her hair was pulled back, and she was still wearing the gray sweater she had arrived in the night Daniel collapsed. "You posted this publicly?" I asked. I asked a necessary question. "You accused an 11-year-old child of stealing from you." "He is not stealing from me. You are." My hands started shaking. I placed them flat against the table because I did not want her to see. I had spent most of the previous night sitting beside Daniel in the intensive care unit, listening to machines breathe and beep, while doctors used phrases like neurological response and unknown exposure. I had not showered. I had barely eaten. Our son was staying with my mother and asking every few hours whether his father was awake. Marissa had chosen that moment to challenge his place in our family. I slid the envelope back toward her. "You need to leave. You cannot ignore a court filing." "I am not ignoring it. I am telling you to leave the hospital." Her face tightened. "You do not control who sees my brother." At that point, I stood, opened the door, and asked the nurse at the desk to call security. It was not dramatic. Marissa did not scream or throw anything. She kept insisting that she was Daniel's sister and that I was isolating him. Security escorted her to the elevator while she told everyone within hearing distance that I was afraid of a simple test. Before the doors closed, she pointed at me and said, "When the truth comes out, do not pretend I did not warn you." For a few seconds, I wondered whether I had overreacted. That was one of my worst habits back then. I could recognize cruelty, but if the cruel person sounded calm enough, I would question my own response. Daniel had always said Marissa was easier to manage when people did not challenge her directly. He did not mean that as approval. It was just how he had survived growing up with her. Their father had died 4 years earlier and left them income from several rental properties. The arrangement was simple enough that even I understood the part Marissa cared about. Daniel's share would eventually pass to his biological children. If he died without one, most of it would return to Marissa. Daniel was alive, but he could not speak for himself, and the doctors could not promise me when that would change. Marissa's filing claimed that I had lied about Owen's paternity and was using Daniel's condition to position myself as the person controlling everything. She wanted a paternity test and temporary authority over Daniel's interest in the family properties. She described herself as the only person protecting his father's legacy. She did not mention that Daniel had named me to make medical and financial decisions if he became unable to do so. She also did not mention that she had been inside our house the night he collapsed. I had come home from work shortly after 6 that evening. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table with Marissa. There were folders spread between them and a stainless steel thermos near his hand. Daniel looked irritated, but that was not unusual after discussing the properties with her. Marissa handled most of the day-to-day communication with tenants. Daniel believed she treated every repair like a personal insult. She believed Daniel wasted money by fixing things before they became emergencies. They had been arguing about replacing a damaged staircase at one of the buildings. When I walked in, Daniel held up his cup and said, "Your sister-in-law has decided I need herbal treatment for stress." Marissa rolled her eyes. "It is tea, Claire. He has barely slept all week." I smelled something sweet and medicinal when I leaned down to kiss him. Daniel whispered, "It tastes terrible." I should have paid more attention to that. Instead, I told him to stop drinking it if he did not like it. He smiled and pushed the cup away. Marissa left about 20 minutes later. She took the folders and said she would return the next morning after Daniel had calmed down. Less than an hour after that, Daniel stood up from the couch, took 2 uneven steps and collapsed. At first, I thought he had fainted. Then his body stiffened, and he stopped responding to me. I called 911 while Owen stood in the hallway asking what was happening. The paramedics asked about medications, allergies, alcohol, and drugs. Daniel took 1 prescription for blood pressure. That was all I knew about. At the hospital, the doctors found a strong sedative in his system. It was not something Daniel had been prescribed, and the amount was higher than what they expected from an ordinary mistake. They could not tell me how it had gotten there. They also could not tell me whether the sedative alone explained everything. Daniel had stopped breathing properly before the ambulance arrived, and the lack of oxygen might have caused additional damage. The police took a statement because of the unexplained medication, but there was no instant investigation like people imagine from television. An officer asked questions, wrote down names, and told me someone would follow up. I mentioned the tea. I also mentioned that Marissa had been there. Then I hated myself for mentioning her, because Daniel was her brother, and accusing someone in the first hours of a medical emergency felt disgusting. Marissa seemed offended when I told her the police might contact her. "You think I drugged him?" I did not say that. "You gave them my name. You were at the house. So were you." That conversation happened before she filed the paternity petition. At the time, I thought her anger came from being frightened. After the hospital security removed her, I returned to Daniel's room and sat beside him. His face looked normal except for the breathing tube. That was almost worse. He looked like he might open his eyes if I said the right thing. My phone kept vibrating. Marissa had added a second post to her public Facebook page. She wrote that she was being blocked from seeing her brother because she had asked for proof that his supposed son was actually related to him. She did not use Owen's name, but anyone who knew us understood. I took screenshots before she deleted anything. Then I called my mother. She answered in a whisper because Owen was asleep on her couch. I told her not to let him use his tablet. She was quiet for a moment. "Has he already seen it?" I asked. "No." But one of his friends sent him a message asking why his aunt says Daniel is not his dad. I closed my eyes. That hurt more than the court filing. Owen had Daniel's expressions, Daniel's stubbornness, and the same habit of leaving cabinet doors open. None of that mattered as proof, but I had never needed proof. Daniel had never asked for it either. Marissa had made occasional comments over the years. Owen had my dark hair while Daniel and Marissa were both blonde. When he was a baby, she joked that he looked more like the male carrier than her brother. Daniel told her to stop, and she laughed like everyone else was too sensitive. I should have stopped inviting her into our home after that. Instead, I convinced myself that keeping the peace was better for Daniel. That was my mistake. I treated his history with Marissa like a problem he alone was responsible for managing. The next morning, a lawyer Daniel and I had used for ordinary family documents came to the hospital. He explained that Marissa could file almost anything she wanted, but filing was not the same as proving it. Her request for temporary control was especially weak because Daniel had already chosen me. The paternity issue was more complicated. Because she had attached it to claims about fraud and future inheritance, the court might allow a limited test rather than let the accusations sit unresolved. "I will do it," I said. The lawyer looked surprised. "You do not have to decide today." I am not letting her spend months telling Owen his father is not his father. Part of me wanted to refuse out of principle. Daniel had never questioned Owen, and I hated the idea that Marissa could force us to prove something simply by making an ugly accusation. But Owen was already being dragged into it. I agreed to cooperate with a court-approved test as long as the results were handled privately and Marissa stopped posting about him. The lawyer asked the court to order her to remove the public claims while the issue was pending. She deleted the Facebook post that afternoon. The family group message remained. My mother said Owen had asked her whether Daniel would still love him if the test said something different. I drove to her house after visiting hours ended. Owen was sitting at the kitchen counter, pushing cereal around a bowl even though it was almost midnight. He looked at me and said, "Did Dad ever wonder?" "No, you would tell me, right?" "Yes, even if it was bad." I sat beside him. "Your dad never wondered. He never asked for a test. He never treated you like anything except his son." He stared at the cereal. "Then why does Aunt Marissa think that?" "Because she wanted something," was the first answer in my mind. I did not say it. "I think she is scared and angry, and she decided to hurt us instead of handling those feelings like an adult." That was the most honest answer I could give him at the time. He nodded, but he did not look relieved. The test happened several days later. A technician took a sample from Owen. The hospital and court handled the sample from Daniel. There was no dramatic confrontation. Marissa did not attend. I signed forms, held Owen's hand, and bought him a milkshake afterward, even though neither of us finished ours. While we waited, Daniel's condition remained almost unchanged. He began breathing without the machine for short periods, but he still did not respond consistently. Once, when I spoke Owen's name, Daniel's fingers moved against the blanket. The nurse warned me that it might have been reflexive. I decided to believe it was not. A detective contacted me near the end of that week. He asked me to go through the evening Daniel collapsed again. When I described the thermos, he asked where it was. I realized I did not know. It had been on the kitchen table when the paramedics arrived. When I returned home 2 days later to collect clothes, it was gone. I called my mother first, thinking she might have cleaned the kitchen when she picked up Owen. She had not. I checked the dishwasher, cabinets, trash, and recycling. Nothing. Then I remembered Marissa had gone into the house the morning after Daniel collapsed. I had given her the spare key at the hospital because she said Daniel needed his phone charger and insurance folder. I was too exhausted to leave his room, and I still thought of her as someone helping me. When I called and asked whether she had taken the thermos, she paused. "It was mine." "Why did you take it?" "Because it was mine." "Did you wash it?" Another pause. "I do not remember." I asked whether she had put anything besides tea in it. Her voice hardened. "You are doing this because you know the test is going to expose you." She ended the call. I gave the detective the exact words as best I could remember. I also found a text Daniel had sent me before I left work that evening. "Marissa brought that sleep tea again. Remind me to grow a spine and say no." It did not prove she had put medication in the tea. It did prove the drink had come from her and that it had happened before. The detective told me not to contact her about the medical investigation again. He did not tell me she was a suspect. He did not tell me she was innocent. He only said they were looking into where the medication might have come from and who had access to Daniel that evening. I changed the locks anyway. I removed Marissa from the hospital visitor list. Daniel's aunt told me that was cruel. She said Marissa was losing her brother too, and that fear made people behave badly. I asked whether fear had forced her to accuse a child publicly. She said nothing for a while. Then she told me she did not want to take sides. Other relatives had stronger opinions. One cousin privately apologized for not defending Owen in the group chat. Daniel's uncle said Marissa had every right to protect family property and that an innocent person should welcome testing. I stopped trying to convince anyone. That was the first real shift for me. Before Daniel collapsed, I had spent years smoothing over the space between him and Marissa. I reminded him about her birthday. I invited her to holidays after they argued. I rewrote his blunt text messages so they sounded less hostile. Now she was using his silence as an opportunity, and I was still worrying about whether my response seemed polite. I stopped. The DNA results arrived 11 days after the hospital confrontation. The lawyer called while I was sitting beside Daniel. "The test confirms the relationship," he said. "Daniel is Owen's biological father." I had known what the result would be. My knees still went weak. I asked him to repeat it, then put the phone beside Daniel's hand and said, "They proved what you already knew." For the first time in almost 2 weeks, Daniel opened his eyes. It lasted only a few seconds. His gaze did not settle on me, and the doctor later said it did not mean he was fully conscious. But I saw it. I called Owen and told him the result before anyone else could. He was quiet. Then he asked, "Does Aunt Marissa have to say sorry now?" "No," I said. "Nobody can make a person mean what they say." The court received the report that same day. Marissa's claim about Owen collapsed immediately. Her request to control Daniel's property interests was denied, partly because Daniel had already selected me, and partly because her public accusations made her conflict impossible to ignore. That was not a punishment. She did not lose everything. She still received income from her own share of the properties. She simply did not get control of Daniel's. The family group chat became strangely active after the results. The same uncle who had supported her wrote that everyone should move forward. A cousin posted that Owen deserved an apology. Daniel's aunt called me and admitted Marissa had gone too far, but she also asked whether I could allow a supervised hospital visit. I said no. Marissa sent me a message through her lawyer. She claimed the paternity petition had never been personal. She said she had acted because Daniel's condition created uncertainty and because their father had wanted the properties to remain in the bloodline. She did not apologize to Owen. She did not admit she had lied. She said the result had resolved the question. There had never been a question until she created one. The DNA result also changed how some people viewed the night Daniel collapsed. Before that, several relatives had treated the tea and the missing thermos as details I was exaggerating because I disliked Marissa. After the result, they started asking why she had moved so quickly to challenge Owen. Why had she been thinking about Daniel's death before the doctors had even explained his condition? Why had she removed the thermos? Why had she posted publicly instead of waiting? I did not have answers. Neither did the police, at least not answers they shared with me. They confirmed that Marissa had been interviewed. They asked about her own prescriptions and about the places Daniel had been during the week before he collapsed. Marissa told relatives that the police were harassing her because I needed someone to blame. Maybe she believed that. Maybe she had brought ordinary tea and panicked when she realized the container could make her look guilty. Maybe she had mixed up medication without understanding the risk. Maybe something much worse had happened. I still do not know. Daniel began waking more consistently during the 3rd week. His recovery was not sudden. He could follow simple instructions before he could speak. When he finally said my name, it came out weak and uneven. He remembered Marissa being at the house. He remembered arguing about the staircase. He remembered the tea tasting bitter. He did not remember collapsing. When I told him about the paternity accusation, he closed his eyes and turned his face away from me. I thought he had fallen asleep. Then he whispered, "She did that to Owen." I said yes. Daniel could not handle a long conversation, but he asked to see our son. Owen stood at the doorway when he arrived, suddenly nervous around his own father. Daniel lifted one hand from the blanket. "Come here, kiddo," he said. Owen crossed the room and leaned carefully against him. Neither of them mentioned the test. Marissa tried to visit again after learning Daniel was awake. She left a handwritten letter with the front desk, saying she wanted to explain her actions directly to him. Daniel read less than 1 page before asking me to put it away. She had written that she was sorry the situation became public, but she still believed she had been right to protect the family. That was as close as she came to an apology. Daniel told me he did not want her in his room. Later, when he was strong enough to understand the legal documents, he confirmed in writing that I should continue handling his affairs during recovery. He also asked the property manager to communicate with Marissa separately. That created practical problems. Repairs took longer. Decisions became more expensive because the siblings were no longer cooperating informally. Daniel lost income while he was unable to work, and I reduced my hours to help with his rehabilitation. Setting boundaries did not make our lives easier. It made them safer. The investigation into the medication remained open when Daniel came home. No one was arrested. The missing thermos was never recovered, at least not that I was told. Some relatives believe Marissa caused his collapse. Others believe she only exploited it. Daniel says he cannot decide which possibility hurts more. Owen has seen Marissa once since then, across a grocery store parking lot. She raised her hand as if she might wave. He turned toward me and kept walking. I did not tell him to forgive her. I did not tell him to hate her either. Marissa wanted a test because she believed blood would decide who belonged in Daniel's family. The result gave her the answer she demanded, but it did not repair what she had done. Daniel still calls Owen kiddo, exactly as he did before any court ordered anyone to prove anything. As for Marissa, I do not know whether we will ever learn exactly what happened to Daniel that night. I only know she will never again be trusted with a key to our home, a place beside his hospital bed, or the power to define who our son is.